All right. I'm back to those people that subscribe to my channel, those people that are coming here for the first time. Uh, I'm introducing one of my friends. In fact, everybody I talk to is a friend, right, Peter? Me and Peter met, and I was on his radio show last week, I believe.
Yep.
It's a FM station 91.3 out of Sonoma, California, and he talks about happy medicine and all kinds of stuff. And we met through a mutual friend, Darwin Starwin, and he's an author. I'm an author. Peter's an author. We're all authors, and we all have outgoing personalities, but we have something in common. We all want to serve. We all want to heal the planet. We're here to give, and we're not so young anymore.
Ah,
But Peter, you're at least 3 years younger than me, so you're still a kid. So you got to carry on the tradition. Anyway, but I found that when we talked and I discovered that you'd been in Nepal doing acupuncture there for like 6, 7 years or more. And you were around the world meeting all these neat, interesting people, and you have an interesting education background, and you somehow got into, we'll have to figure out why or how come, but somehow you went from the idea of making films and doing that to going to Ohio University, then going to acupuncture school, and and then getting into this whole Oriental medicine thing, which we're going to talk about. And so I'm going to kind of let Peter speak for himself since I have a tendency to go on and on. So we're going to cut me back a little. Going to let Peter tell you a little bit about himself. And I will post information on his website, his radio station, and how to get a hold of him in the information below on the YouTube channel here. So, Peter, it's yours.
okay. Well, hopefully we'll do some good juggling here. Yeah, I'm Peter Fairfield, and I've been practicing acupuncture and transformational medicine for over 50 years. And so Bill was interested in the story of how we got there, and so it's been kind of interesting. Um, well, my spiritual experiences started when I was a little boy, as many people have, especially now that we're going through so many earth transformations. And there's so many of us out there now that really needed a lifetime of training and getting whacked around by karma so that we could be who we are at this particular junction, which is a critical junction for Earth and America and the world and so forth. Um, before me, before my dad, there were 13 generations of ministers in the family. So there's kind of this spiritual thread. My dad wasn't particularly spiritual, and because I have a rebellious nature, if he had been, I probably wouldn't be. So I thank him for sacrificing his life for that. When I was about 8, I heard the word infinity. I couldn't figure out what that was. How could something not begin or end? Which is how my mother described it. And so without realizing that I was doing something unusual, I spent a month or two trying to feel infinity. If it's there, I can get there. So one day, trying to feel this, I felt it. I got to a place that didn't begin or end. And oh, that's what it is. That seems normal. Many years later, I was doing long retreats in the Himalayas, and I realized that had been a bridge to some reality that I had been to before or other. So since time is relative in the quantum, it's simultaneous. We don't have past lives, we have simultaneous concurrent existences, and our consciousness moves through. But we'll get through all of that. So anyway, somehow this idea of infinity and non-duality, although I didn't know those words for many years later, saved me. I like many of us, I had a challenging childhood. Wasn't like I was grew up in Sarajevo or someplace with bombs and people like that. It was nothing that bad. But we all get challenged. We all learn not to be loved, and then we learn to be loved, and then we learn to love. It's kind of like that. So when I was about 10 or 11, I realized that when somebody would hurt, I would want to put my hands on them. I would want to help them. I didn't know that was healing. I didn't know that was anything particular. And so there was a part of me that always kind of felt like that. I did go to film school in New York City for a little while. Mostly I studied psychedelics, girls, and music. But it was an exciting time, and it kind of woke me up. that I could have an existence other than the 9 to 5 pay your mortgage existence that I had grown up with, and so many of us had grown up with. And at one point, I was actually an encyclopedia salesman in Southern Ohio. And this was actually a great training for me because first I learned I could talk to anybody. And I had actually gone door to door to sell stationery when I was about 8. My mom couldn't believe it. So there was something about talking to people and being with people. But as the experience in Southern Ohio, being an encyclopedia salesman, we're going door to door, talking to people, need to ask you a few questions, that kind of thing. But I learned to talk to anybody. And also, I learned pattern recognition. After a little while, I could look at a house and I just knew instinctively, are they, how educated they were, if one or both people had jobs, how many kids they had. You could tell these things just by looking at what was in the yard or what was in the window or how things were messy or dirty, or you could just tell. And then so without realizing, this was my training for medicine, to understand people, look at people, and to look at patterns and begin to see the deeper part of someone's life. And so it's important. Um, During that time, I learned to meditate. I learned I got my first mantra from a guy in a blue blazer and a ripped tie. I think it was transcendental meditation or something, and you had to stop smoking pot for 3 weeks, and it cost $80, which is a lot of money and a lot of time for me not to smoke pot at the time. But that's what we were all doing, and it was worth it. And over the next few years, I left New York, and um, I lived in a number of spiritual communities and ashrams, and because there was something there I could feel. There was something that touched a deep part of me that I desperately needed, like air or water, and it woke me up. And so I would kind of go back and forth a year in a meditation retreat or an ashram, and then be out in the world doing stuff. And I kind of went back and forth like that. I started studying various kinds of healing in my mid 20s, and I was praying for my work. I said, okay, universe, I want something meaningful to do that helps people, and something that really, assists us, assists the world, and will help me. And so one day I woke up, and every single cell in my body said I needed to study acupuncture. Well, there weren't any acupuncture schools at the time. There were a few private people giving courses, and I thought, well, okay. So that day I went to a used bookstore in Santa Barbara, and I had been there the day before. I like books and stuff. As I walked in, there was a stack of 5 books on the counter. They were the only good 5 books. There were only 5 books in English on acupuncture that somebody had just brought in just before I got there. And I'd been to the store the day before. There was nothing like that. So I figured the universe was really, that this was real guidance from the universe. And I was doing kind of body work, and I was, I was into healing at this time. And I had lived in a commune, it's actually in Santa Barbara, up in the mountains there, and we had done some healing. So I was sort of into it, but I wasn't as into it. And when I woke up that morning, I was given a feeling about what the lineage of my that I should look for in acupuncture, Chinese medicine. I didn't know what lineage was, but there was a feeling of what I could look for. And it was 6 or 7 years until I found that lineage. In the meantime, I'd studied with several doctors in Santa Barbara and LA. I worked at the acupuncture research project at UCLA. I studied biofeedback with a wonderful man named Mel Werbach, who at the time was the head of the Biofeedback Society of California. And so I learned that you could use your mind to change your body. I learned that you could go into the somatic reality of your body, and you could change the effect of your nervous system, and so forth. And this is one of the most important trainings of my life. During that time, I was living with a Taoist master, Master Ni. We were living in a house way up in the mountains of Malibu. And so we would do 4 or 5 hours of practice in the morning. qigong, meditation, and so forth. And then I would go to work in Beverly Hills or at UCLA and do biofeedback. So it was a rich time for me, rich. And after that year, I went to acupuncture school in Boston. And I had a girlfriend who was a doctor of Chinese medicine from China. And so the universe was presenting me with all these wonderful experiences. And so after acupuncture school, I was in the Chicago area for a year trying to work out some mother stuff and parental stuff. And then I was invited to come out to California. They were starting a naturopathic school in California. And so I started to go there as a student. But eventually, in a short time, I ended up setting up a department of Chinese medicine and acupuncture. And so at that time, we had a 4-year, 5,000-hour program using the naturopathic curriculum on acupuncture. And this was in 1980, and which was the most extensive program in the country at that time. Now, unfortunately, we had no naturopathic law in California. So the naturopathic part of the school didn't continue, but the acupuncture school did. And it was profound to be able to hire people to teach things that I wanted to teach, which turned out to be very, very different than the focus from some of the other acupuncture schools. And I was still very interested in this idea of transformation. I was still trying to heal myself. At one point, I went to an acupuncturist who was really, I should lay back up. Before that, when I first moved out to California, I heard that there was a seminar being taught, and I went there. And there was a wonderful man named Michael Brofman who he had the feeling in how he taught acupuncture that I was given 6 or 7 years before when I woke up in the morning knowing that I should study acupuncture. He had the quality of lineage. He had the feeling of deep introspection. And he had studied with teachers in Taiwan, very esoteric teachers in Taiwan. So I was led to him, although there was this big gap in time. And I had, I studied with a number of different teachers, but nobody had that deep spiritual connection, and nobody looked as deeply into the body and into people as what I heard from Michael in that July Saturday in '79. So somehow I was linked in, and so we had the acupuncture school, and then I had a practice in the town of Sonoma, where I'm back to now. And but at some point, I felt like something big was missing. I hadn't really had a spiritual experience in a little while. I hadn't lived in a community. I would do a Tibetan retreat or a Zen retreat or a Sufi retreat or something. Somebody would come up, but I didn't really have that deep commitment. It wasn't full on, so to speak. So I started to feel. I had a nice practice in Sonoma. I was well known. I was liked. I had a girlfriend. I had a dog. I had a house. All the things we're supposed to want, and I did want them. But something huge was missing in that. I wasn't being fed or nourished. I knew that I needed to go farther. So my dad was actually born in China. My grandparents were missionaries in China. And I taught Chinese medicine. I taught Chinese philosophy in acupuncture schools. And so I thought I need to go to China. So through friends of friends, I set up um, uh, studying at the Shanghai Academy of Traditional Medicine, which is kind of the Harvard of Chinese medicine. There's always discussion about who's good, but they were very solid, very good. So I set up the opportunity to go to China and teach English. So I gave up my practice in the spring, and I went down to Monterey to study Chinese for the summer, the Monterey Institute of International Studies. And I was, I'd never been good at languages before, and somehow the Chinese was just going in. It was relatively easy for me. My body and psyche just opened up, and but I still felt like something was missing. I still felt like I wanted a spiritual quest, and but my inner voice said, and we have to trust our inner voices, and we'll get more into this because our inner voices are truth speaking. Inner voice said, just keep going, it'll work out. So one day, I don't know, 5 or 6 weeks into this 12-week course, I went down to the water in Carmel, near where I was living, and I was standing by the ocean, just craving something. And I just made a prayer. I said, just please, universe, just take me to the place where I can get to the next level. And well, whatever, I didn't even know what the next level was. And I remember all of a sudden these symbols of light just flew out of my heart. And in hindsight, I realized that they were Tibetan symbols, although I didn't really interpret them like that at that moment. The next day, I was meditating after class in my house, and a face appeared to me. And it looked at me and it turned sideways. And I I said, okay, this is important. Well, I don't want to think about it. I'm just going to put it out of my mind. I'm not going to fixate on this. I'm not going to make this anything that it isn't. I just let it be. So, and the day or two after that, I got a letter saying that I couldn't go to China because the people that had sponsored me there were doing something else. So I didn't have that agreement in mainland China. So I decided that I would go to Taiwan through Michael Brockman and other people that had connections in Taiwan and some connections. So a few weeks later, when I got finished with the school, I I went to Taiwan, and I had Tibetan Buddhist friends and some Chinese medical connections there. And so for a few weeks, I was in Taipei. I visited another town, and I remember that I had a friend down in Kaohsiung who had actually gone to the naturopathic school where we had the acupuncture program. So I called him and went down to visit Kaohsiung. Kaohsiung in southern Taiwan is a much more traditional place. Shortly after I'd been there, and I put the word out, I was looking to meet Tibetan Buddhists, that sort of thing, because Tibetan Buddhism is fairly common in Taiwan. And there was a brand new school of Chinese medicine that had just started. So I went and applied and got accepted there. And I was actually the first American student to be invited to this school. And I was even on Kaohsiung TV, speaking my terrible Chinese and kind of being interviewed. But one day I got a call. Do you want to meet some Chinese? Do you want to meet some Lamas? I said, sure. So I gave him my address, and there was a pause, and the person on the phone laughed. Okay. A few minutes later, this old taxi drove up in front of the house. And inside was this old Chinese man with a silk outfit, monk's outfit, that was golden. And I had never before or since seen a silk Tibetan outfit, but this guy had that on. And we drove 1 block away, 1 block away from where my friend was living. There are these two lamas that were visiting from Nepal. And as I went inside there, it was kind of like a garage on the bottom floor. On a desk was a picture of this lama. I looked at that and I said, wow, that looks like the face. And no. They all look alike. I'm making this up. I did not want to jump into it. So I went upstairs into this bedroom where these two lamas were staying from Nepal. And on the night table, there was a photograph, exactly the face that I had seen in this meditative vision several months before in Monterey. So I said, I know that person. Who was that? And that was their teacher, Dobson Rinpoche in Nepal. And so I told them the story. And they said, well, we're going there in 10 days. Would you like to come with us? So what am I going to do? Say no? Of course I said yes. I figured this would be more important than going to the Chinese Medical College in Kaohsiung. So 10 days later, with a plane full of Taiwanese Tibetan Buddhist tourists, we flew to Nepal. And it turns out my teacher had never accepted a Western student before. So the first day we went to his house, and we were in this kind of big sunroom on the edge of his house in the town of Bodhanath, Nepal, which is just outside of Kathmandu. And we were all sitting around. And of course, the tourists knew the story now, and they knew I was meeting this teacher for the first time. So everyone's kind of watching me and watching him. And we were given these cups of Tibetan tea, Tibetan butter tea, which is salt and tea and butter, which I got to love. But at the meantime, it tasted like goat vomit. Not that I tasted goat vomit, but that's that I thought that's just so. My teacher was watching me, and he looked at me and goes, "How do you like it?" He said that to the translator. I went, "Real good." So he said, "Oh, okay, well, here." So he whispered to a monk, and the monk took it away. I said, "Well, how nice." He noticed I didn't like it. He took it away. So a minute later, they brought this big bowl, this much bigger bowl of Tibetan tea. And the teacher to the translator said, "Well, make sure you finish it. Very good for you," which means don't bullshit the teacher. So that was my very first lesson. And he put me in the room next to his. And after about 3 weeks, I got a place nearby and began to work with him. After a few weeks, I kept saying, "Rinpoche, how about some teachings? How about some teachings?" And he had kept it quiet. He had come to Nepal a number of years before, maybe 20 years before, and he'd kept a very low profile. He had never accepted Westerners. And there were people coming from all over the world to Nepal to either hike, smoke dope, or to study Buddhism. And but he had never accepted a Westerner before. And so I felt, I heard the story. I realized I was special. I was kind of this head trip about it. And there are other wonderful lamas in town, as I'll talk about in a minute. So I kept saying, "Okay, Rinpoche, how about some teachings? How about some teaching?" So he said, "Okay, go get a translator, come back." I think it was Thursday. So I went and got Eric Pemakunthon, who's since become very famous. He's a wonderful translator. And he translated about an hour and a half of this pith instruction in Tibetan Buddhism. And probably if I'd had it together and I had just gotten those teachings, probably all I needed. But again, I was so in my head. And I said, after all, I said, "Well, Rinpoche, how about something advanced? I'm a meditator." This is a guy that had done almost 40 years of meditation. He did 9 years in a retreat in a room when he first got to Nepal. So he kind of chuckled and looked at me into the transfer and said, "What is the nature of mind?" So I thought to myself, "Oh, I know this. Well, you don't know the nature of mind. You are the nature of mind." So I turned back and he had no head. There was this big black space where his head was. I kind of, bah, 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 kind of spaced out. I went to the nature of mind, but I didn't know it. Ah. 20 years later, I had taught an acupuncture course in Marin County, and we were having dinner at this fish restaurant. And people were asking me about my story. And somehow I had told that story. Well, here, 20 years later, I went back to that room and I received a mind transmission on the nature of mind. It took me 20 years to be ready for something advanced. But it was a wonderful experience. He didn't teach me so much, like A and B and C and D and stuff. I learned that from some of the other teachers. But what I got for him, and I didn't even realize I was getting this, was the state of mind that we're talking. So as an acupuncturist, and I set up an acupuncture practice in that town. I was kind of cocky. I thought I was good at pulse diagnosis. And I took his pulse at times, was trying to help him. And he was a wonderful man. He had this gruff appearance, but he was such a deep heart. I took his pulse one time, and my mind stopped. I couldn't tell what I was feeling. I just couldn't tell what was going on. And a number of years later, I was back in the summer, staying for the summer in San Francisco, and I went to hear a teaching by this very esoteric lineage holder from northeastern Tibet, and I went to hear him speak, and the translator was terrible, but he just turned into light and this powerful emanation. So I'm jumping around, but I'll come back to that thread. So he was staying at a friend's house in Oakland, so I went to visit him, and I walked in, and he grabbed me. He goes, "You're my student," and he grabbed me and he put his hand in my head. It was like a fire hose of chi just going through my body, and I said, "Thanks." It's kind of an understatement, and and I said, "What can I do for you?" So he went and sat down in this room, and he said, "Here, take my pulse." When I took his pulse, I realized what I was feeling in his pulse and what I felt in my teacher's pulse was Buddha nature. this innate purity of being, which is basically the enlightened essence that's inside all of us. We don't have to get it anymore, but we have to kind of uncover it. So, this stuff is, it's simple, it's ever present, but it's also, you gotta take a few assumptions, a few habitual patterns off to begin to feel it. That's all it takes. So anyway, I was in Nepal and I was having these experiences, and it was kind of wild. Like one day, I there was a wealthy Tibetan family there who designed carpets. They were one of the first people in Bodhana to make Tibetan carpets, and so I had become their doctor and was doctor of their family and stuff. And I was designed a few Tibetan carpets that I was going to bring back and sell in America. So I needed to make some money because you don't make much money doing acupuncture in Nepal. It's either $3 or $8, depending upon if they were local or tourist, or nothing, even more common. So one day I had a dream, and I dreamed that this family had two daughters, and they were they were both possessed. And so the first one, I looked at them and I started doing mantras, powerful mantras, and I drove the demon out. And the second one was a little older. I started doing the same thing, and then she turned into a sexy woman. I started to get sidetracked, and then I went no, and I beamed up a stronger force, and I woke up laughing. Ha ha ha! I woke up like that because I tossed these demons out in this dream. So that night, I went to tell Dr. Rinpoche, my teacher, this. I'm sitting on the floor of his room, and he's on the bed. Very, very humble, the whole thing. And I was talking to this other monk, and Rinpoche was doing da 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 with the beads, and they're doing something on the bed. I wasn't paying attention. The next morning, I woke up, and blah. I felt like demons were inside me. I was like this powerful energy, and so I went on that day, and I went to a friend's house, owed me some money, and I opened the door, and the door came off in my hand, and the king of Derke whacked me in the back of the head with this metal stirrup. And it was like that for 2 days. I finally went, I remember my teacher going, that I went, Rinpoche, what did you do to me? He laughed. He goes, very good, you didn't hit anybody. He had zapped me with this energy that you use to cast out demons. I said, very good, but you need to do more work with this. You can do that. So that was the kind of lessons that I got from my teacher. And of course, in the meantime, I guess I can talk about this now. It's been 30 years. To make money, and I still had this sense of adventure. I wanted to. That was part of me. I wanted to join the CIA or be, be some. I still had this desire for adventure. So I heard that you could do gold smuggling from that there are these gold runs that you did, and I still needed money to live. And so I signed up and I went to Taiwan. I went to Hong Kong. And you waited there for a few weeks, and then they would fit you for this vest, and then you had about 30 pounds of gold, and there's a vest that you wore that was skin tight. And we went through China, and then we went through Tibet, and then we came back. So it was very exciting. There were five of us on this thing, and it was very exciting. And I wanted to do it again because you made $5,000, which was a fortune back then. It was enough to live almost for a year. So the second time I did it, the lamas they have no judgment about anything here. I don't normally go get a divination from your lama. Does this look good? Does this look safe? And so all of the all my normal lamas were out of town, and so there was a very famous lama, one of the most famous ones. And this is so indicative about how not judgmental they are. His name was Khyentse Rinpoche, and he was 7 feet tall. He was a profound lama. On YouTube, there's a lot of stories about him and films about him. And so I went over to the monastery, and it's like in town I lived in, there were like 40 monasteries. All these amazing enlightened beings lived all over. It was like they were my neighbors. You just didn't realize how lucky we were. And so I went over, I went to the monastery, went up to this high room, and there was um, a guy who's become very famous, a Western French guy named Mathieu Ricard. And I said, hey, Mathieu, I need to get a mo. And he goes, oh, no problem. I'll go ask Rinpoche. So he opened up these double doors. And here is this room with hundreds of monks doing this very high ceremony. They're all chanting and there's horns going on. And way up on this dais is Khyentse Rinpoche in this big outfit. And so some go, no, 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 I'll come back. This is no problem. So in the midst of this totally sacred ceremony, he walks up and he taps Khyentse Rinpoche on the shoulder, who's in the midst of this very high ceremony, and he whispers in his ear. And Rinpoche looks at him and goes, hey, hi. And so he takes off his mala and he does this divination. He goes like this, yeah, go smuggle gold. Safe or interesting something. So anyway, we went there. I went to Hong Kong and went and got fitted for the vest. And we went through China, which is fairly easy. They had it set up where sometimes you had the vest on you and they check your bags. It's not to check your bags, but they checked you, but they didn't check your bag. Somehow it was all worked out. And when we got to the border of Tibet and Nepal, it was hot. You know, you had to walk a couple of miles. And so we hiked across the border. And when we got to the first part and they looked at us, we started to feel like something was crazy. Something was. And so there was one part, I forget what it was, when you go through customs and when you go through, you get your papers. So anyway, we went through this, we're sweaty, we're wearing these vests, and we had down jackets on over the vest, even though it was a little hot. And the bus was full, so we had to get on top of the bus and where we're going to the next town. We were told to get to the border at the end of the day. At the end of the day, it turned out that the people that were picking us up didn't get that message. So we had to take the bus. So anyway, we're on the bus and we see that the men from the customs, they walk by, they look at us. And then they drove ahead, they got in cars. And then as we're on the bus, they drove up to the bus driver and they whispered to the bus driver and they looked up at us up at the top of the bus. So we thought, oh, this doesn't look good. So the bus took off. We drove around at the first stop. We all jumped off the bus, and we went and we took our vests off and put them in this culvert. We went and sat in this tea house. Several people went into town to try to get a ride. Excuse me. And myself and this woman, we waited, and all of a sudden the police came a little while later, and they wanted to examine us. And I said, no, no. You cannot, this is a woman. You cannot touch her. And so we waited and then they examined us. Just in that process, somebody came in and yelled and was pointing up the road. We assumed to the place where the vests were, but by now it was dark. So the police took out in one direction. We ran down the road about a mile, then we went up to the top of this way high hill and we watched until about 2 a.m. And the police were going back and forth looking for us. And once we sort of calmed down, then we went down a hill. We hiked about 8 miles and we got a taxi into town the next day. And so I had a lot of adventures like that. not a lot, but I sort of got the excitement out of my system. And it's kind of amazing, you know, to be on the edge like that and to be and there was something powerful and spiritual about it. Obviously smuggling gold, it's not very spiritual. But the sense of being on the edge, the sense of being alive, the sense of feeling danger, the sense of having your life on the line, and yet having a sense of trust that it was going to be okay. And so, yeah, there was something enlivening and awakening about that. So I would go back to America in the summers, and then I would come back. I did that for a few years. At one point, I was trying to finish up these basic practices, the Nundo practices, and I went up to a cabin just south of Mount Everest. And I spent 3 months alone in this cabin doing these intense practices. And part of this, I had done 4 or 5 hours a day of practices in my house, Bodhanath, and come out and having a fairly normal life. But it's the intensity and the duration of doing these practices, and also being in this environment, that began to change me in deep ways that I didn't really even understand. Because with all these people that are doing this, people from all over the world had come, and I had a practice. And so it was a very rich time. So at the end of these 3 months up in the mountains, I came back to the States and eventually came back to Sonoma and started to practice again and began to really do this deep work with people. And I end up kind of being part of this acupuncture school that we started, and um, I taught us a number of seminars based on transformation, awakening the mystical body, and trying to teach other acupuncturists what it really means to do transformational work. And which I've just condensed 25 or 30 years into 20 minutes here. But so there was a lot of very interesting experiences in between. But you begin to realize that there's a nature of reality that we think is intrinsic. It's solid, it's figure. I love these people that go, "Well, I don't believe what I can touch and feel. I don't believe in them miracles." And but life is such a miracle. There's a ball of fire 800,000 miles across, 93 million miles away. It's so damn hot, you can get a sunburn. It keeps everything alive in this whole universe. I'm sorry, this whole solar system. That's a miracle. We have trillions of cells in our body. It's a big number. You go to a big beach, it's, grain of sand, it's probably maybe a trillion grains of sand. It's a big number. And somehow there's an intelligence of the body that keeps most of those cells in these substructures into bigger structures, into systems, into organs. Somehow there's an intelligence in our body that keeps most of it running together. And when it doesn't run together, it means that our trauma has covered it over. Well, in the universe, we're just like that in the universe. There's this underlying presence of consciousness and purity of being that keeps life together, that creates an intelligent web that we're all a part of. It's amazing, really. And there's such a miracle that we live in, although it seems so normal. It seems normal that we live in this amazing miracle that it doesn't seem like a miracle when you stop and slow down and pay attention. Really pay attention. It's a miracle. The web of life is so profound now. What they're finding, they're finding that trees, even of different species, will send nourishment to other trees that are sick or dying. They're finding that bird song affects tree growth and can sometimes even change the weather based on patterns of fungus and mold and dryness, all kinds of things. That's just this incredible web. One of my lineages through teaching and seminars and stuff, I met a wonderful man who was an elder and a teacher in the Hatha tradition, which is the older tradition in New Zealand. So I've had some spiritual connection to some of the New Zealand elders, and that's part of my lineage a little bit. One time I was in Hawaii and I sat on the beach and they came to me and said, "This is the reality of the ocean." And all of a sudden, I was given this beautiful gift of I could see into the ocean. It was like you could see a long way, and I felt part of this whole life of the ocean, and I could feel the fish and the waves and the creatures. And for a couple of days after that, I could look at a fish and come over and swim by me and stuff. And there's this web of life, this web of unity. And as we're traumatized and when we're going through all of our karmic lessons, we miss this unity, but there is this unity, and you can trust that. Now, people call it God, people call it all kinds of names, but it's the same thing. It's this pure consciousness that we're all part of. So what's the purpose of life? Our purpose of life, first you get screwed up and then you get healed and then you help others. That's how I see it. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling here. You got any questions there, Reverend Bill?
Well, it's an interesting background, and I was you had me on this adventure with you. So I'm looking at this thing and I'm thinking, when did you feel you needed roots to get back to California and establish whatever you're doing now? What what took you off this path of adventure? Because you're a little bit more focused now. I mean, you got a practice, you got clients, you got a radio show, you got books out, you've got local community roots. Um, you've adapted well. Something. What got you to back to that?
Well, even in Nepal, I had a focus because I had a practice and so forth. But I realized when I was living in Nepal, they didn't need me there. They had a lot of people way beyond what I could do. So I came back to the United States and I, uh, I set up a practice in Sonoma actually, and I was there for a while. Then I went back to Nepal. Oh, I did. I did have an experience. At one point I took a teaching job with some friends from acupuncture school that had started an acupuncture school in San Diego, and it was interesting. You know, I felt a deep connection to Chinese medicine. I felt it was part of my karma to help get it going in America. And I woke up one day and I couldn't feel a future. I couldn't. I felt contained. I couldn't reach out and feel for something. So I went. I drove north. One of the communities I had lived at when I was younger was some people that had lived with Yogananda. It was called the Sunburst in Santa Barbara.
That's in
And
Santa Barbara, right? Is that the one that's in Santa Barbara?
yeah, they were in Santa Barbara.
Yeah, I got Paul something, but the guy that started that drop, he left Yogananda and went on his own. Right? Or are we thinking about the same guy?
Yeah, the Norm
Paulson or something, or
Norm Paulson, who was a
there you
character.
go. There
He
you
had
go.
his own.
I've been dealing with his people off and on for the last 25 years and never really got down there, but I've been invited to go. They have a
It,
fancy
it, it
farms and everything.
it's changed a lot. They went through a lot of a lot of permutations. I think now they're up in Buellton. They have a place up there. Some of them, but anyway. So I had a connection to Yogananda. So I'm driving north, and I stop at the Yogananda Center in northern San Diego County, and I'm walking up the hill. And all of a sudden, Yogananda, who'd been dead since the 50s, appeared to me in the body. And I'd had spiritual experience, but I'd never had anything like that before. And and he looked at me and he said, you have 3 months to live. And you know, I could smell roses and curry. I could see the oil in his hair. It was very real. And then I blinked and he was gone. And I sat down and I went, what the fuck? I, and it just shocked me. So I was driving north. I went to my friend Margot's house, and she said, "Well, that's funny. I had a dream about you dying this morning." And but for the next few weeks, it was kind of like that. I was supposed to go out and to the desert to visit some friends, and I had a dream that I was riding bikes around this lake and died, and it was amazing. And I'd be watching TV, and I thought, well, I shouldn't watch TV because I'm going to be dead soon. And you know, it was this whole facing death. So I called this Lama in that I knew in San Francisco. He said he would do dream divination, and I called my teacher's monastery in Nepal, and they said, you know, Rinpoche will get back to you. Well, the Lama in San Francisco said, very serious, have to do these mantras. And then I got a call the next day from my teacher's monastery. Said Rinpoche looked at it and said it's okay, he would fix it. Well, what does that mean? And you know, since they didn't really speak English, it went through several permutations of speaking to one person, other who knows what he really heard. So eventually, there's a there's all kinds of energetic and spiritual diseases, not diseases, but illnesses that happen from doing the wrong practice or from getting your energy screwed up. And so I needed to go back and finish some practice. So I did. I went back and did retreat, and then I came back to the West again because they needed me here. So I've had all these experiences in between, and it became so important to begin to teach what I knew and to begin to go deeper with what I knew. And with acupuncture, in a sense, you're using very material, using needles, and you're stimulating points to change the physiology. And physiology is really where this connects. But there's a very physical physiology that's based on both Western understanding and also the study of the meridians and the energetic organs. And also, when you look at quantum reality, which has to do with the effect of consciousness on matter, and of course, matter is just condensed consciousness and light. So there's all these different levels. So your intent and your focus and the way that you understand reality, the way you understand a situation and a person that you're working with changes how everything works. And so the interface of these different dimensions as you work on somebody is quite profound. And some people are very basic and you just keep it physical. And I worked on a woman yesterday, another acupuncture practitioner, who was experiencing heart problems. And she was a very old soul, and she hadn't really focused on this deeper part yet. And so different people come with different levels of work they need. And the truth is, well, let me back up. I was quite screwed up in my own emotional work as a kid. Phil and Michael Bruffin, I mentioned earlier, helped me get through it. I had some blockages in my emotional heart and so forth. And when healing myself, I really learned about others. And so that had always been my interest. I was studying biofeedback at UCLA with this wonderful psychiatrist, actually. Was the beginning, and it was this thread that brought me all the way through. And then the integration of the spiritual underpinnings of this emotional work, and really the deeper way to look at trauma, the deeper way to look at how these wounds affect us both physiologically, became so important. In the West, they still think it's the brain. Well, the brain mirrors it all. It goes through the brain. But in Chinese medicine, Tibetan medicine, Unani medicine, and most of the other indigenous medicines of the world, we understand that the emotions really have much more to do with the organs in the body, polarity alignment in the body, and so forth. And so, in beginning to help people, you begin to see these patterns, how people get stuck, how their karmic lessons are sort of routed in these very shapes, these constellations of misalignment, how the trauma affects the body. So that has been my work. And when I did excuse me, when I did biofeedback, I realized that you could talk people into being better. You could guide them into feeling their body. You could guide them into experiencing what was going on. They could feel the parts that were off, and then they could gradually let those parts come back together and knit to a sense of wholeness and reunification. So today, even though I do treat people in person, I work with people all over the world on the phone. And what I find is, but by hearing someone's voice, I can describe pretty much everything about them. And by guiding them into feel these places in the body and their energy field that are misaligned, we can kind of put them back in shape. And so it's been a very interesting progression of how, as I go deeper, my work gets deeper, as I can help people in a much deeper way. And my lessons are deeper. I thought I'd done most of my work. I thought I was pretty far along. The universe has a great sense of humor. And then last July, I think it was, I started having these incredible abdominal pains. And I finally found out I had cancer. Well, I was surprised. I thought that I thought I had done my. And in Chinese medicine, we have two realities. And I'd like to get into this more. We have one reality, our higher spiritual sense comes down. From the higher dimensions, it comes into the heart. And then we have this genetic and karmic, materially karmic momentum from our ancestors. The momentum of the father comes up through the right kidney. The momentum of the mother comes up through the left kidney. And in pulse diagnosis, when I feel the left kidney or I feel the right kidney, I can describe the personality of the parent. I can describe pretty much if that parent was present or absent or emotionally containing or divisive or supportive, just from the pulse. And so my cancer was in the was in the left kidney. She was with my mother. Oh, there was a lot of stuff with my mother, and I thought I had dealt with it, but I hadn't. So this process of dealing with my cancer um, took me to these deep lessons that have been so profound. So the cancer has been the greatest teacher of my life. Has taken me to all the places that I had missed. At this point, I'm almost the person I thought I already was, if that makes sense to you. I so I spent time, as soon as I found this out, I spent more time going deeply, somatically experiencing the left kidney, and I found a lot of unhealed places about my mother there, and I inhaled, changed the frequency of the kidney. I went back to my ancestry. I found that I had a grandmother, Hattie, about 4 generations back, that was so judgmental that it affected epigenetically the ancestors. So I had to go back and clear that. And about 3 months ago, when we had the first imaging, it looked like it was moving, and then I just had imaging last week that said it was clearing, continuing to clear. And I'm getting some chemo, so it's not just that, but you can feel things changing. And so it had also, it was stage 4 when I found out. It had metastasized into the lungs and also under the the sternum. And so there was a time when I'd been living with my mother. My parents had split up when I was about 10 months old. And she had sent me to go live with my dad, who I didn't know very well. And she'd kind of badmouthed him. I don't need to go into all that. But there was a place going down the back steps of the apartment we lived in. I was getting into my father's car where I felt this whole area just freeze. I felt my heart freeze. And that area was where the lymph glands were. I had metastasis. I thought I'd cured all. So I spent a lot more time going into that and releasing that. I found the whole structure underneath, the whole membrane structure underneath my sternum that was holding all this. I didn't even know that structure was there. So I'm still working to do that. And um, I didn't realize how much I was using sugar. I got off sugar and carbs mostly. Lost 70 pounds. Lost my hair. I'm getting to like it. Between looking at my body and looking at my head, I get out of the shower in the morning, look in there. I thought some Martian was in the bathroom with me. But it's been so profound. People say, "Oh, I'm sorry," but I go, "No, this has been the greatest teacher of my life, more than my Tibetan Lamas, more than the acupuncture teachers, more than anything. This has required me to listen finally to the voice in my body and to follow it and to pay attention." Because when you eat something that's not your body doesn't like, it tells you. It tells you this doesn't feel very good, or it doesn't feel as good, or it could feel better. Our body tells us everything. It is this guidebook is there. So it's been profound. A lot of times we're eating because we just need to calm down. We're stressed. We're freaked out in some way we don't even realize. And as soon as you begin to to divest ourselves of these veils of these disguises of affect, and you begin to just see what's real. Your body tells you exactly what it wants, and what it takes to heal. So that is I'm thankful for this. I'm ready. I'm ready, done being thankful. We're almost there. I think we're almost through it. But so it's been fascinating and surprising. And again, I thought I had covered this ground, but there was these deeper levels that I had passed over, and they hurt. It hurts to feel this deep stuff. Just the other day, I was watching a movie. It was called Frequency, where somehow this guy's father dies when he's 6, and at 32 he discovers a shortwave radio, and the father has so somehow they're communicating across time, and so somehow all this father wound came up. And just from watching this movie, I started to feel this loss from relationship with my own dad. I don't need to get into all that here, but I discovered how deeply hurt I was. So as soon as you discover that, you feel where it is, you feel the shape of it, you feel what it's like, and the more that you feel it, your body doesn't have to hold it anymore. The things that we resist and hold and push away, the body takes as this unexpressed three-dimensional experience in your body. As soon as you let yourself feel it, then you can change how it feels. You can let the energy just flow, and that's where the deep healing, the deep spiritual healing, the deep karmic undoing come. And so we become vulnerable to ourselves. Well, what is enlightenment? And enlightenment is the ultimate vulnerability to everything. No resistance, just everything flows through you, nothing sticks, and yet you're aware. Still do your laundry, still shine your shoes if you're into that. But you're experiencing the full totality of the infinite and the present at the same time. It's quite magical.
Well, you're right about a couple of things at this stage of life. Um, I think both of us, when we were younger, which we're talking the 20s to 30s, I had a lot of information. I had a lot of quote unquote understanding. I had knowledge, and I thought I was well on my way to understanding things. But as we live longer, Peter, you know this to be true, the more we absorb, the more we realize how much more there is that we don't know. And the unknown becomes even greater. And even though you thought you knew it all when you're younger, you realize when you get older, you know nothing. And so that's kind of where I think both of us are at there now. And you mentioned gratitude because that's one of the three things I teach in my healings, and we've talked about this, is self-love, which deals with a lot of these issues you're talking about now. And self-love is identifying yourself as the source, loving the source, loving you, loving the source is loving you. Loving you is loving everyone because there's only us, there's one consciousness. And then you love your mother, you love your father, you love your neighbor, you love your enemy. It's all you. So you go through that various things. And then you have to forgive yourself, starting with that. But it's not until you reach the third plateau, the third mountaintop, gratitude, where you're grateful for everything that has ever happened to you. In your case, in my case, we've both been fighting cancer. That's the greatest gift I've ever gotten. It's taught me so much.
Yes.
It's brought me profound understanding and peace, and awareness and empathy and all these different things that you think, I didn't need that lesson. I already know that. Well, you know what? It gets into a profoundly deeper place than you thought it could ever go.
Yeah.
And watching you talk about this, I could feel that that was the element when you realize when you're grateful, not for what you're going to get in the future, or you're thankful for what you have. No, you're grateful for everything, including the cancer, because you realize that everything was part of the evolutionary process. Everything was a gift for you, for me, for all, to help them on their journey. That's all it's about. And, Buddha did it with suffering brings you there, and Jesus brought it, forgiveness brings you there. I mean, that was his big lesson. He's getting killed by these people, he's getting persecuted, he's getting tortured, and yet forgiveness was his message. Great message. Buddha, great message. Pain and suffering brings you closer to the divine, right? But it's in gratitude. That's the one I'm having trouble teaching people because, well, I had terrible childhood. I had this, I go, everything you went through made you who you are today and who you'll be tomorrow. And everything is steps. You should,
You know, I think that the door that opens up the beginning of that is realizing there's no blame. When we're angry at somebody, when we're blaming somebody, when we're accusing somebody, when we find fault in others and so forth, um, then it's not on ourselves. As soon as we begin to realize that my life is creating itself, everything in my life is on a quantum understanding or a spiritual understanding, I've drawn to myself. That there's no blame, including I don't blame myself. But as soon as we start to get there, and then as soon as you begin to trust the universe a little bit and you realize that everything is a blessing, every single thing in life, no matter how difficult it seems, is a blessing. And so as soon as you find the intelligence of the disease or intelligence of the situation and the blessing of the situation, it just changes everything. And for me, that's the, the fertilizer that nourishes the eventual understanding of gratitude. And so it's so profound in all the best ways.
it's too bad that we have to get to an older physical place in our life before most people understand the importance of gratitude. Um, and it's when you're no longer a victim that everything coming to you, you manifested, or it's being manifested for you for the best and for your spiritual health. It's for you. It truly is the gift. And I've seen people, and you've seen people because we both work in the healing arts. People that are in stage 4 cancer, it can have such a profound impact on their spiritual life that another 10 years of healthy life would have never gave them.
Yes, it's true.
You go within, relationships have more meaning. Forgiveness is greater. You're willing to forgive others, forgive yourself. You're you're moving into new loving territory, and that is really the gift of dying. And in that process, all of us are in the process of dying. We just don't realize at what level, you know. So yeah, you got stage 4, you got this, you got that. What's that Bob Dylan song? You're busy being, if you're not busy being born, you're busy dying, right?
Right.
And so, and then the whole laugh about that is there is no death, there's no life. None of this is real. And you've been to Nepal, you've been to Tibet, you've been to China, you know the philosophy. You've been within, you feel it, you know it. None of this is real, but love
Well,
it, love it.
I've talked to many dead people that have passed and gave tangible, provable information. I mean, it's just a connection of consciousness. It's amazing. I love the quote from Muhammad Ali. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Everybody has a reality until life does something that kind of slaps you in the face and goes, "Hey, what about this?" And that's when the real blessing happens because it wakes you out of your assumption of how things are to taking another gander at what is. And so I think we both are in the process or have reached at least the level of that understanding. So it's great.
Well, I think we're both being baby boomers, although you're much younger than me by several years. Um,
Not much.
we are we're obligated. I mean, I really mean this when I say we are obligated to take the knowledge, not so much the knowledge, but the wisdom, because there's a difference between the two, the wisdom of what we've learned and pass it on to this new generation. Unlike many, I'm not critical of the young generation, even though I don't understand their music. I don't understand their movies. I don't understand their humor. I mean, there's a lot of stuff about the but I understand spiritual wealth they're bringing into this cosmic play that we're in. This is a great new generation of young people. We should be, these guys are going to save this planet. So, true
You
belief.
know, I have a I have a wonderful son who's 31. He's brilliant and accomplished, and he was actually conceived at the Karmapa's monastery in Tibet. But he's, his life is not so easy, but he knew he was loved. And he's got so different. He's in many ways he's so different than me. His lessons are different. And I've had to begin to try to understand what's going on in the world now by by getting to know him more and looking deeply at him. And he's quite different in many ways. He's a wonderful being. He's a beautiful heart and so forth. But we have kind of different sensibilities in a certain way. He's such a hard worker. But so he's been my new lesson is begin to understand the world through him and to try to see the differences. But we came from World War One, parents that went through World War One, World War Two, the Depression, Vietnam, and so forth. These were great cataclysmic twists of civilization, and my parents were, not very wide awake in many ways. And I thank them for that because that allowed me to try to find the door. And so my son is much more awake than I was, and so trying to understand the differences in the world, the needs of the world through him and his friends, and what I've learned to understand. It's been an important lesson.
I think and I'm speaking for both of us because I think you're in agreement. We reached a point where we realized that teachers and gurus are all of us. We we don't need to find these elevated beings sitting on a ledge on the Himalayan mountaintops. If we're really open to the spiritual cosmetic uh, consciousness, this whole thing open to love, then even babies and children and young people, uh, they're teaching us something every day. And like dog will teach you something about life, a tree, whatever. If you're open to love, it's a continuing learning process, and everything and everybody is your teacher. So my hat's off to these young people. We've left them a mess, but I'm confident they're going to clean it up and find solutions.
Well, I don't know if it's such a mess. It looks like a mess. No matter which side of the political spectrum you're on, I think you see things are breaking apart. And if you keep stepping back, I think we're going to find an important roots of America, roots in the world that have sort of exploded and gone beyond where anybody could have guessed they would go. But in a way, it's like a pimple breaking apart. It's like the toxins are coming out, the disruption is coming out, the disconnection is coming out, the dishonesty is coming out, and I think what we're seeing is a incredible healing, where deeper truth, a more aligned structure with how to run the country, how to run the world, or how to create a better world. I think it's happening. We have the technology to create a very sustainable world. There's how to do things, and there's plenty of land in the world, and you just can envision a world that's really beautiful, that's really aligned, that's really connected, where the people of the world work with each other and love each other and work to create a better world for everybody. So there's a lot of younger souls now that are burping and farting and so forth. But I think that especially in America, I see a realignment happening in the next 5 or 6 years, although things may break apart in the meantime. Um, it's kind of amazing, really. And that's why I love the work I do, because I get to work with individuals and groups to help them just find their own truth and their own voice, and then they can go on and discover. You know, I I had a beloved dog. She was half coyote, half Catahoula. She was found abandoned on a Navajo reservation. She was with me for 12 or 13 years. And she was with me most of the time. Now, I had to put her down about a month ago. It was heartbreaking. She had developed a paralysis and she was too old to really work with it. So I'm holding her head and my head next to her head. So I nod and they gave her a shot to put her to sleep. And I could feel her conscience go to sleep. Then I nodded again. And they put a shot that stopped the heart. And I could feel her consciousness, her spiritual being, just lift out of the body. You could feel the life go as a cloud, as an entity, as a three-dimensional space. It just lifted off the body. That's the essence of life. I remember I was crying and hugging her body, and then all of a sudden I realized she's not there. The being I loved was not there anymore. And so when we realized that life in the body is totally alive, I mean, it wasn't like it dissolved and disappeared. You could feel that it dissolved. It went away as a totality, as a reality. And so once we stop fearing death, when we start realizing that it's just another sequence. I mean, we were somewhere before we were born. Where was that? It's probably where we're going to go when we die. And as soon as you start to think, as soon as you start to be to not welcome death necessarily, but become curious about it or realize that it's okay. I think Ram Dass used to say, "Death is safe, not going to kill you." I love that.
Anyway, uh, would you like to leave some wisdom at the end of this interview? Is there something that you've learned that you'd like to pass on?
Yeah, have more fun.
Okay.
Fun. I mean, not necessarily just how many margaritas can you drink, although that's not bad. But just find the joy in life, find the humor in life, find the humor in difficulty, and realize that if you created something, you can recreate it. And there are people around to help you if you need some help. But the real wisdom, the real truth is right inside you. There's not only is this great intelligence of the body telling exactly what it wants and doesn't want, but there's also the genetic momentum from our ancestors that has this incredible um, guidance that we can tune into. The wonderful help from the higher dimensions that's right there with us all the time. And so we're not alone. We're never alone. Sometimes we want to be, but all you have to do is begin to open up, relax, and as you experience joy and the joie de vivre of living, then all of a sudden you realize that it's okay. Even on the hardest day, it's okay. I was wounded by a surgeon a couple of years ago and was in extreme pain. And I had very few movements that didn't hurt. I could still be happy. I could still, because I had found that place inside me that was already happy. Actually, I have a book about that. It's called Deep Happy. And I actually have another book out. It's a fun novel. It has a lot of the stuff in it. It's called Deep into the Fire, where it's a thriller where the main character is a reincarnated Tibetan Lama. So some of this stuff is sort of in there if people are interested.
And both your books are on Amazon,
They're on Amazon. Yeah.
and your website is
Deep into it's oneinfiniteheart.com, and I'm on Facebook. And I don't think the website's up to date, but you can find me. And I do individual work with people, and I do travel to various cities sometimes and do seminars and stuff, which I haven't done for a little while, but I'm getting ready to set some more up. So if anybody wants to talk to me or work with me,
and I heard a rumor that you might come visit me up at my retreat.
yes, I want to come up to the Mount Shasta one, and I was thinking in the next day or two to come up and maybe have dinner with you.
Hell, maybe we could even take an afternoon drive and go up there.
That'd be fun. I look forward to it.
All right. Do you have another way to contact you? Do you have an email, public email that you
E-
use?
Actually, the best way is just to call me. Because I
Okay.
get 100 emails a day. I don't see a lot of them. It's 415-377-0862. 415-377-0862. Text me or call me. That's actually the best way.
All
And
right.
you can email me at ompsych, ompsych for orthomedical psychiatry, ompsych369 @gmail. But keep trying because I don't always see my emails, but calling me is the best. That's the best way.
All right. So I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. If you're listening in for the first time, subscribe. I interview, I feel are interesting people because these people love, they serve, they're genuine, authentic, uh, caring, loving souls. That's the best word I can say it. If I've interviewed them, there's some value there. Please come check out Peter. And if you live in Northern California and you want to drop into his office, he's at the Terrace Center for Health and Happiness in Sonoma, I believe.
Yeah, I see people in Sonoma and also in San Anselmo. And I work on the phone with people all over the world.
All right. Blessings and peace. Hang on, Peter. We'll talk in a minute.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank, thank you for listening in. God bless you all.